are live and on lockdown.
Are you ready?
Broadcasting from Edinburgh, Scotland and across the globe.
Listen here.
You're listening to Ramsey Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders podcast. For host Fraser Ramsey.
Hey, this is Afia Leatham, creator of the Frame Your Day app, helping you walk out every day in victory. I'm proud to be a sponsor of Ramsey Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders.
Hi, this is Zakia Ringgold from naturalsoapbyzakia.com, proud sponsors of the Ramsey Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders podcast.
Good day, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another edition to Ramsey Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders podcast. A very off-the-cuff, spontaneous decision after, what day are we on? Thursday. It is a Thursday. Thursday sometime in the year.
Can you believe it?
It is a Thursday, so if you listen, it will be a Thursday at some point. But anyway, not sure we're going to keep it generic and evergreen. But I ended my guest is through a speed networking for online entrepreneurs. I connected with Karen. I'm not going to. I will ask her in a second how to pronounce her last name in a second because I will probably butcher it to say the least. And without creating saying something that shouldn't be said.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to, for those who are watching, we're talking about trauma. So we're obviously, our title of our podcast is Turning Trauma into Triumph. So the people who have been through trauma, and I'm going to dissect. We're going to speak to Karen, and we're going to chat to her about her life and how she is doing what she's doing now, and how she's helping people through the trauma and her coaching style, and that's what we're going to talk about, and how and just a bit of background about her, and that's what we're going to do. So, Karen, welcome to the Ramsey Unleashed Going Beyond Borders podcast. Thank you for the short notice request and coming on, and the connection we had on the sort of the Entrepreneurs Connect group. With Doug and all that, so it was good. At Speed Networking, which is really good fun on a Tuesday night. Well, Tuesday night for me, so Tuesday afternoon for the peeps in America. Well, it was afternoon for you anyway.
It's just early afternoon for me. I'm on Pacific time. Yes.
Yeah, Pacific time. Yes. So, how did you pronounce your last name?
You pronounce it Azer, like Azer.
So it's like So it's almost like Fraser, but Azer.
Exactly. Very good.
It's almost like pronouncing my name, but your last name is like my Azer.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we already had a connection we hadn't even thought of yet.
The way you pronounce my name is like your last name. That's interesting. So,
yep, exactly.
That's it. So Fraser, Azer. That's just like dropping the F, but you're just using the A.
Yes, well, it's very interesting because it's a German name, and nobody in the U.S. can say it either. And they don't even say it right, because I lived in Switzerland in German-speaking Switzerland for a while, and they're like, "No, it's Oeser." And they said, "What have you done?" And I said, "Nobody can say our name anywhere in the world."
Actually,
remember it.
What part of Germany is it? Are you
that I'm Hamburg. It's from Hamburg.
Hamburg.
Their
Okay.
origins are from Hamburg.
That's good. Yeah. I am multitasking very badly here while I'm listening to you because I'm trying to share this.
Yeah, that's okay. So I was so happy when you called this morning, because we were going to schedule this out for a week or two, and he just said the Lord tapped on his shoulder and said, "Reach out," and it just so happens it was 6 a.m. my time, and I grabbed my phone. I normally do not look at my phone from 6 to 7, but this morning I did. And yours was the first message that I saw. So I thought, okay, God, this must be a sign that we have something to share today.
Yeah. So let's dig in for those who are watching or listening around the world. I'm basically in Scotland. Tell us a bit about you. Tell us where you're from originally. So your general background from this of the year dot, usually when you're kids growing up in life, and how I know you've we mentioned before we hit live that the reason why you're dealing with you're helping people in trauma because you've been through it yourself. But let's unpack that journey and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a very small rural town in Oregon, and I was my family didn't go to church or anything. When I was 4 years old, I found a pamphlet that invited us to go to Vacation Bible School.
Okay.
And so I said, Jess, got to do that. Got to do that. That's wonderful. And so I went and I got bit by the Holy Spirit so hard. I went and I just was so full of Jesus so quickly that I went and there were 55 families that I introduced to Jesus as a 4-year-old. And that's where the enemy came in. That's where he entered the story. He did not like that one bit. And, my family of origin, both sides of my family had experienced a lot of sexual abuse.
Okay.
And both on my father's side, it was primarily his stepfather.
Got you.
And the whole family was in denial, including my dad.
Right.
And also my dad had this thing where we had role confusion. So he was always trying to make my mother jealous.
Right.
And so my mom became very jealous of me very early. And so it became this really, really kind of weird dynamic. And we never knew who the parent was in the house. And so I had a brother who started acting out.
Right.
And so he started acting out and he got in drugs, and I was being the perfect one. I was in sports, I was getting good grades, but I was getting totally, completely ignored.
Right.
So from a very early age, everybody wants to be seen, heard, and understood. And from a very early age, what it took to be noticed was not anywhere in the healthy realm. And it was from one extreme to the other. And so it was a very difficult journey because I learned how to the way to get attention was to get the attention of men. And that was something that caused me a lot of trouble growing up.
Well, I was going before I actually forget because you say you talk about Oregon. Person I know who used to live in Edinburgh. Now lives in Galashiels, which is just down near towards the Scottish border.
Mm-hmm.
He's a retired pastor, minister, but still does the odd. Called Steve Aitken. He's from Oregon, and he was a pastor of a church called All Nations Christian Fellowship in Edinburgh.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And he's basically he's originally from Oregon, but has resided with his wife and kids. His wife's Scottish, and kids are grown up. He's a grandpa now, basically, but he's originally from Oregon. So there's a wee small world. So if he's watching on the replay, on this,
quack quack, because that's what you say when you're from Oregon. Because our mascot is a duck.
If he's watching this, he will hopefully have a lot of wee chuckle to himself.
Anybody from Oregon will get a kick out of that.
Anyway, it's just but going back. So you were just saying that. So let's just revert back. You were saying that basically you're trying to, because you were kind of being ignored, you wanted to try. You're literally dabbling into trying to attract guys into your life. And how did that technically unfold? And what kind of trouble did you get yourself into?
Yeah, well, and part of the problem was, so back to when I was originally talking about that, I had such a deep love of Jesus, but because of this whole confusion thing going, the church kept kicking me to the curb. We're like, we don't want girls like you in our church. You're trouble. Stay out of our youth groups. Don't be around. So I got very, very confused about, I thought we were supposed to come here to be loved, but we weren't being loved. And so there's a part of me that knew there was a healthy love to be had, but instead it was getting, and it was a lot of times it was, getting the attention of older men. Right. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who are willing to participate in that. And, that's also one of the reasons why I have a deep passion myself for helping women come out of the whole sex trade.
Right.
I didn't go that far, but I wasn't that far.
Did you find that you were kind of a little bit like the, would it say I was going to say the odd one out, and the word that comes to mind is the black sheep of the church a little bit?
100%. 100%.
Right.
And I've been that way my whole life, because that's one of the things, you ask how did, I had several traumas, and then I had a health trauma. We can talk about some of the other traumas, but the big theme in what I'm doing now, it's almost starting where I am and going backwards, because I've had a call on my life to help women out of sexual addiction who've also been hurt by the church, because they have a deep cry, but they've been kicked to the curb because their promiscuity said, we don't want people like you. And then you go to the Old Testament and Jesus says, we want people like you, And so the women who come to me are constantly saying, I walked away from the church 20, 30 years ago. But part of me, I just feel that call, and I say, that's okay. I left for 30 years. I left completely for 30 years. And once I realized Jesus says, come as you are, that was part of where I started releasing that trauma, when I realized he wasn't who the world says I was.
You still feel, looking back, even though we're still dissecting your sort of journey, thinking now and looking back, you still feel that basically the church, or the word sex and that problem is still very much a taboo subject, and they still don't know how to handle it to this day.
I agree. And the thing about it is it's very binary. And it's really interesting, because right now I'm reading through the Bible with there's something called the Bible Recap. If you haven't listened to it, I can tell people that's a wonderful thing. It's a great way to listen to the word. But I'm checking in with a girlfriend, and I've read the Bible multiple times, but this year it's hitting me in a different way. And I think it's because I'm so deep in it with all of my clients, because one of the biggest things that I say is when we need to learn truth, it needs to go through the filter of the Bible. But the problem is most people don't know their Bible. Most people don't know the scriptures. They don't know the truth of our scriptures. And in fact, just last week, there was a passage in there where David, it wasn't at his end stuff, because we know Bathsheba, we know about that, where he did that. But even earlier on, there was some sin. But God chose him anyway. And just to realize the depth of how fallen humanity is, yet he still comes to us. And that is one of my biggest messages, because often what I hear a lot of times from people just on the street who meet me is, how can you be so nice and be a Christian? Because they've been hit over the head so hard by religion. And I said, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I believe God allowed me to go through all of that stuff, because I could go through all of that, yet people could still see joy in me, because it's the joy of him in me that they see, even though on paper, most women would not have survived what I went through. A lot of women.
So on that note, let's dissect that, because let's give it the real and the rawness of your journey and what you went through.
Yeah. So it was, I felt very I was very abandoned. I was very alone. And, and that's what the enemy tries to do. And I thought I lost my right to Jesus.
Right.
I actually thought I gave up my right. And, and one of the things that often happens when you go through trauma is you live out of your mind. You don't live out of your spirit and your soul. And I just completely shut down. I did something called theophostic work. And the first question she asked is, what was the first emotion you ever remember having? Do you want to know? I could come up with nothing. I couldn't remember my first emotional memory. Yet, I am known as the family memory bank. If anybody has a question about what happened in our family, they call me and I can remember it down to probably the color of the buttons, the date, the time, the second. I could have that level of detail, but it was completely void of emotion. And I had no idea that my life until, that happened when I was 40. So up until that point, my entire past was a set of memorized pictures.
Right.
And because I couldn't actually even, I didn't even know the emotions were a possibility, because whenever I started to want to speak for myself or say something, whether it was in my home, whether it was in school, because one of the things, God designed me to be somebody I'm super inquisitive.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at 10 years old, they were telling the story of Esther. And I started asking questions and they shut me down. And now I know it's because they didn't know the answers. The teachers didn't know the answers themselves, but I just thought, what is wrong with me that I'm curious about knowing things?
Yeah.
And I get in trouble for it. And so at home, it was, unless I was being groomed by my father, I was invisible. And then the times that I did speak up, my mom would be calling me names and telling me that every time I wanted to do something, she would tell me I was called to do the opposite and I was going against God if I did that. And so I literally walked around not knowing what my purpose was or that I mattered or to be seen, except the boys.
So do you find it? You feel it's more of a little bit of this, even though your mum was, you were saying you were being thought you were meant to be doing this. Your mum said you were meant to be doing the opposite. It's almost that. It's kind of almost like psychological sort of trauma abuse, because she's obviously
Yes, it 100% was.
Basically, she's saying, I want you to do this instead, and it's not. So basically, she's directing you, and it's kind of like,
She was trying to make me into everything that would make my dad not like me.
Right. Okay. So she, by going that direction of the things that by doing the things that your mum wanted, why would your dad not like you? What was the reason for that kind of? Was she working you off? Were they not getting on for some reason, or was there what was the kind of?
Well, the big thing was, and this is another thing that we can tap into a little bit too, is my mom had always struggled with weight.
Right. Okay.
And I was athletic and everything, so he really played into that. But what happened was it ultimately turned into, I struggled with anorexia for almost 30 years.
Okay.
Because my metabolism wouldn't allow me to be heavy, which is often what women do in that situation. They gain a lot of weight, so you won't be attractive. So I went the other way. And because I was trying to disappear. And that's what my mom wanted me to do. She wanted me to disappear because she wanted the attention. And the only intention in the house was on me from my dad. And I was trying to avoid it because he couldn't keep his hands to himself.
Right. He was more, sort of kind of like not physical, more like what's the word I'm trying to say? Not, it's like not physically sexual abuse, but like a kind of
yes, you actually tapped into it. That's the thing about it, and that's what it was almost not the act of sexual abuse itself is not. It's a horrible thing. But sometimes when it doesn't do that, but it's just inappropriate, like just touching on the shoulders, touching on the head, touching on the back, just enough that made you feel it.
The borderline could have gone that way.
Yes. And so my dad is sending me these messages, touching me. So it's not, and again, you often become like, I don't want anybody to ever touch me again, or you let everybody touch you. And so I ended up going into let everybody touch me, but then I would feel horrible because of the messages of what I was hearing at church. And so I'd have to numb out. And I didn't go down the drug route. That wasn't my area. But like I said, I became very promiscuous because that was the only kind of attention that I could get.
Did you weren't involved like alcohol or anything like that? No. Did you?
I dabbled in it, but that wasn't my struggle. My big thing was I was promiscuous and I was horribly anorexic.
Right. Okay. How did you eventually deal with that? How did you try? Obviously, with your metabolism and being athletic, how did you eventually sort of turn that table?
Well, it was actually, like I said, ended up being multi-decade. I carried the anorexia, and that was, I had these phases of trauma. So when I was, it was 44, I was in a horrible car accident.
Right. Okay.
And just to fill in one other thing is that, so my addiction once I became an adult was work. I became an addict to work. I worked for a bank and I was going. My identity was being in the investment banking business. That's everything that I did. I just stayed so busy to ensure that I couldn't feel anything. And so I had, my boy's father and I split up in 2012. And part of that is I'd been so isolated. Right. He didn't want me to have any friends. And so this is how the Lord came back into my life. I literally just tuned. I didn't even talk to God. I didn't even go through the angry God thing that, a lot of people struggle with that.
Let's backtrack a little bit because just hang on a second. You've been married before, yeah? Yep. So this is dicey. So when did you? So let's go to the part when you sort of finish education. So anyway, your 20s, because 20s is usually when you get your sort of first jobs and that kind of thing. And what was your kind of first? Let's talk about your working environment. What was your first job? Obviously, and then was it the bank early? When did you start the bank, or when you kind of the bank was constant from like early 20s, or?
Yes, and so what I did is I left Oregon and I moved all the way to Boston to the other side of the country.
Okay.
And then I took a year off and I backpacked around South America. And then I came back and that's when I decided to go into economics. And so I finished out my degree, got it in international relations and economics. I got a job at investment as a stockbroker. It was an English firm called SG Warburg. And one of the areas that the Lord has given me favor in business is he puts me in situations where I get accelerated pretty quickly. And so the first job that I got was a small branch office for this big English firm that was trying to break into the US. So in 2 years' time, I was able to go into about 15 years worth of experience because they let me do everything. So instantly, and the reason I say that is because instantly I had purpose and I had so many things to learn. And then I got my CFA, which is, what you get, that's the certification you get. Then I went to business school. And then I was hired by a Swiss bank and I worked in London for 2 years. And because of the type of job that it was, I was able to get accelerated. So I worked insane number of hours and I did that until I had children.
So how did that, by working, literally almost like being a workaholic in a sense?
Yes, I wasn't a drug addict. I was a workaholic, yes.
Right. Okay, so being a workaholic in that sense, how did that affect your faith in general? And then before you had, at what point did you get married? And then, when you met your husband at the time, and then having kids and interacting, all that mishmash together?
Yeah, so my son, so we got married pretty early on in my early 20s, but we were married for 10 years before we had children.
Right, okay.
And he was going to medical school. So both of us were always going to school, always trying to get degrees. He wasn't a workaholic, he was an academic-aholic. But, we that's what we put our all into. And interestingly, like I said, I talk to a lot of women who go through the kind of journey that I have, and a lot of them go through that phase of being mad at God. How could this have happened to me? Why did you bring this? I went a different route, and I didn't even think about it. My ex-husband and I, for 10 years, did not want to talk about spirituality or anything. It blows my mind, because all I think about is I'll think about God all the time, and to think that I just had an absence of it. So I had an absence of feelings. So my spirit man was shut down, and then my body was shut down. And so all I had was this mind that was like this, going, and I never slept. I had terrible insomnia. I couldn't sleep at all. And I just could not stop. And so that's when I got into my car accident. I decided, so when my husband and I split, that's when I didn't have anybody. And I said, well, and I was living in the South at the time. So there's a church on every block in the South. And I said, well, people are supposed to go to church when they have nobody. I think I'm going to give it a try. And so I went, and that's how I got back into the church.
What was your ex-husband a believer or not? No? Or?
No. Well, he was brought up. He was baptized Catholic. He didn't even go through confirmation.
Right. Okay. So he was.
So
he wasn't.
Yeah, and he still to this day has no interest in it.
So right. Right. Okay. So did he kind of? Was he a kind of like you touched on that he was pretty much didn't let you have any friends. So he must have been. So that's a kind of a form of trauma and abuse at the same time as well.
Yeah, he's definitely a narcissist. I don't throw that word around very often because a lot of people do, but he was very, very controlling.
Right. Okay.
And that's another reason why I worked all the time, because I could control that and not go home to be controlled.
So I'm guessing while so basically both of you working like a hamster wheel on heat, basically.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Pardon the phrase.
No, it's fair. It's fair.
Don't talk about trauma, but got still laughing here. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You have to bring humor into it, right? It's perfectly fine.
So apart from being in that, so basically with working all the time, you're obviously just that your anorexia is still kind of in play and dealing, because you're just constantly working. You must have been some hard balance to try and keep. Were you making yourself sick, or were you just kind of just couldn't keep the weight on, were you burning?
I just basically was pretty much starving myself. I was able. I kept enough where I could keep going.
Right.
But it was always just on the edge. And I was getting sick a lot. Right. Because that's one of the things now is I help women recognize when they're going there. Because I said, when you start getting sick, it's because your immune system is breaking down. Right. And so then I got in a car accident in 2014. Right. And the reason that's so important, that's when my whole story shifted. That was my bottom, because I knew enough at that point that when I ended up getting contusions on 7 of my spine. I was on bed rest for 12 weeks, but my first words were, God, this is what it took to get me to sit still. You got my attention. You got my attention. And then after that, I was sick for about 12 weeks. Then starting in January, so the accident was in August. Starting in January the following year, I started to lose my memory.
Mm.
I started to lose my speech. I could barely walk. I didn't know what was going on with me. And at first they thought it was a traumatic brain injury, but they ruled that out. They eventually found out it was Lyme disease.
Oh, Lyme disease. You should be bitten by
Yes.
something.
Yeah, I was even in a wheelchair for a while. I couldn't speak. I couldn't count. I had to get an adult caregiver.
So somewhere along the line, you're bitten by a tick.
And I have no idea. I don't ever remember being bit.
That's interesting. That's interesting because I know somebody who's been a couple of people who've had that. They've been, and it's a lot. It takes it's a long term thing.
They diagnosed it now, but back then,
yeah.
So I ended up there was a series of one person after another coming in to help me get to the bottom of what was going on, but it was the worst, best thing that ever happened to me.
Right.
And then I got 3rd stage colon cancer. All this happened within 18 months' time.
And how old were you at the time?
And I was 44.
You were 44, right? So.
Yes, with 2 young children. So I had to give my kids back to their dad because I couldn't care for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yet I never, ever, 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 ever felt abandoned by God, ever, which is just amazing. So that's when I started to become a writer. I've always been a writer my whole life. I've enjoyed writing. And what I did to get me through that is I started reading the Psalm.
Okay.
And I'd read a Psalm, and then I do a journal entry. I call them vignettes of just having what God spoke to me during that time, whether it was about the verse itself, the notes from the study Bible, or something somebody said that day. And I could just see how God would just weave everything together every single day. And that's one thing, being an analyst, a really good use of that skill was able to see how God was connecting all these dots.
When did you, obviously being in a wheelchair, when did you start to get your speech back and all that? And when did you start to regain these kind of abilities?
Yes. So I found there was a doctor in Chicago, and so when I found out I got the cancer, I knew that I could go the modern medicine way, or you could go more of what they call alternative medicine ways. And my outlook was not good on paper.
Right.
But the nurse of my doctor went to a prophetic church, and he said, I want to take you to my church and have them pray for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never even heard of such a thing. I thought any kind of miracle healings all ended in the Bible. I did not even know that was a possibility. And so a friend of mine paid to get me there to start getting that healing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the way that the way that the whole method that they use, it's whole body, it's mind, body, spirit. So you do lots of protocols, you bring your body back into balance. So I ended up not having to have surgery. So, it was through my diet. It was through some of the protocols. And most importantly, it was through prayer. And so, in a lot of it, so I was having to get IV infusions 3 or 4 times a week it was 5 years.
Oh.
And that's how I get most of my nutrition. So that's a long way to get to your question. How did I start getting my body back? Is all those IV infusions that the enemy wanted to destroy me. God brought me to a place where I could get the infusions that could get the nutrients back up into my body to get me healthy, to gaining weight again. But I was declared, after 2 years, I was declared cured. But the Lord had me go to that infusion center for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because people wanted to hear my healing story.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd say, what was your protocol? And I would ask them if they're Christian. And I said, because if I tell you my protocol, I'm selling you snake oil if I don't tell you that part of it. You could take all the vitamins, you could do these methods, you can do the saunas, you can do all of these things. But you can't get these kind of results without the great doctor, without the great physician.
Yes.
And so I realized about a year into it, I realized that was my mission field.
I remember there. I've also I've had my own experience with cancer myself. Actually, I had mild kidney
Really?
cancer. Yes, I had mild kidney cancer
Wow.
last year. I'm at a lump removed, so yeah, I've had my slight scare with that department as
Yeah,
well.
it's scary, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is a kind of it's not interesting experience to say the least, but it's yeah. So I've been to that as well. But so you've kind of been going back. You've finished the nutrients. You've finished the infusions. But just before we go forward, looking at the sort of journey from what you've been through and how you're sort of technically church didn't like you. You're kind of you're sort of kind of pawned off back and forth between your folks, and your marriage was pretty much broke down and things.
Yeah.
Looking back at those kind of traumas and looking back at what you went through, what was the worst thing that you went through, and what was it really most hurtful?
Good question. The most hurtful was men in the church who would use Bible verses to control me.
Right.
That was worse than my dad, to be honest, because, well, it actually was in concert with my dad, to be honest, because my dad was very active in the church.
Okay.
You know, we were, if the doors were open, we were there Baptist. We were a very classic Baptist family.
Right.
And that was one of the conclusions, you know, because my dad studied scripture in the morning and everything. And so that was really confusing to me, especially as I, you know, became a teenager. I'm like, if going to church every time the door is open and reading scriptures produces that fruit, no, thank you.
Right.
Not interested in that. And so I was getting those messages both at the church, the confusing messages at both places, but yet I had a love for Jesus. I had such a love for Jesus, and I didn't know what to do with it. But like I said, the good thing about it is when I did walk away for 30 years, is I never, ever felt betrayed by God once. I didn't go that way. He protected me while I had all these other traumas. You know, I've been raped 3 times. You know, it's
never getting into the nitty gritty of this. This is why, at least, and not to laugh at it.
That's fine. But yeah,
so you've been. This is because I've interviewed people in the past who have been through molesting as well. So, what were the occasions of these 3 rapes?
they were, well, one was by a relative.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 2 were, one, I was drinking too much as a teenager. And the other time I was in college. Actually, I was drinking too much there too.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I didn't drink anymore, because I didn't want to go down that route. And that was in college. So after that, I pretty much quit drinking at that point. But that first one happened when I was 16.
Right.
And when I told my mom about it, and she took me to a counselor. The counselor reported it to the school. Everybody found out about it.
Right.
The entire school found out about it. And I was 16 when that happened. And I'll never forget the day when I walked back to my desk, because everybody knew why I was going to the principal's office. And that's when I just said, all bets are off. I don't care. If you're going to accuse me of being like that, I'm just going to be like that. And then I became addicted to men.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so attracted. I met my boy's father. I met him when I had just turned 20.
Mm-hmm.
But he was such a gentleman. And so I married the first guy who was a gentleman to me.
It's good.
And I had no perspective that there's other people, that there are other ways to be. And so, but from that time, it started at 13. So from 13 to 21, or 20, because I met Rick when I was 20, to 20, that was a very, very promiscuous time for me.
Basically, one of your main struggles was probably sexual sin. This was your struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very interesting because how we remember things in people's perspective is, I always thought that's how I'd be remembered at high school. But my first book I wrote was called Energized by Joy. And I talked about this. And most of the people who I thought were judging me the most at school,
mm-hmm.
they actually just said they were sad for me.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So for 40 years, I believe that I'd been judged so heavily.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, a few people were very vocal, judgy at the school. But I didn't even want to go to my high school reunion because I thought everybody would be talking, and remembering.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them said that you just had that joyful spirit in you, but they knew something dark had to be in my life to be making me behave that way.
Got you. So now, going forward back to where we left off, you basically now finished your infusions, and you're pretty much you're healthy, you're in a good place. What was the next part from there? Once you finished all that part, what was your next moving forward chapter?
You mean for my health journey part?
Yeah, because you've finished your infusions. You've been going there for a year.
Yep.
You're kind of like feeling more normal, I presume. Feeling good.
Yeah. Yes, I did. So something amazing happened to me too while I was going through that healing, is that I discovered worship dance.
Worship dance. Okay.
Yes. And I had gone to a women's conference,
mm-hmm.
and I didn't want to go to this conference. A friend of mine said, I bought your ticket and you're coming to this conference with me.
Okay.
So I went to the conference, and there they had some women that were worship dancing. And I didn't even know it was a thing. And instantly I just felt something inside of me shift. And I felt a call on my life. And so I joined a school called Dancing for Him school, and I became a licensed minister of dance. And why that had such an impact on me was because it was part of my healing protocol.
Okay.
It wasn't, because I realized, once I had all of the, the protocols down that they were telling you from the doctors, and I was praying and I was doing all that, there's a 6-month period where I was in my routine, but all of a sudden my skin got brighter, my hair was growing back, I was gaining weight. And I said, the only thing that changed was I was worship dancing.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, because when you're dancing for the Lord, that bypasses your thinking brain. I had lived on my brain for all these years. Lyme took my brain away, so my brain wasn't working. So I had to rely on the spirit.
I've had, for some reason, I remember when you said, all I can think of is when you do worship dancing, I bet you're walking into, this is like some like 80s Jane Fonda workout video or something.
No. Like
No, not
liturgical
quite.
dancing. Yeah, no, liturgical dancing. Yeah, no, I didn't dance in the clubs. That wasn't my thing. No.
Sorry, I had that random joke in my head. I thought.
No, that's funny. You had to say it. Yeah, a lot of people don't know what to do with it.
Showing her age now. Showing her age. So,
Yeah, no problem at all. But and so that's, I call it my prayer language now because it bypasses my brain. So before I do my devotions every day, I actually have a Pandora station on my phone, and I have the station Kim Walker Smith. And for 5 years now, I just say, Holy Spirit, serve up what song I need today. 100% of the time, it's the exact song that I needed for the day. And while I'm doing that, I'm connecting with him. And he also has me, at that time, puts people on my heart who I could be praying for. So I pray for people because I'm thinking about a song, it's like, I am brave, and I surrender and all these songs. And I'm like, who can I pray this for in my world right now? And so that's part of what I do. And so I incorporate a lot of movement because with our nervous systems, that's how we engage mind, body, spirit. And so that's a lot of what I do is I try to say, God made us 3-part beings and he wants all 3 parts of us. A lot of times, because even when we pray, we often do it out of our minds. We're not doing it from our spirits. We're not doing it, spirit to spirit. And God wants all of us.
How did you find with so going forward now, learning worship dance, and then obviously so the trauma let's dissect into the trauma coach and release, the releasing part.
Yeah.
When did that start to develop? And then obviously now we mentioned when we met on the networking on Tuesday that you sort of do a sort of practice thing for those who are listening, can actually, for those who are going through trauma, that can sort of use to help them.
Yeah.
So tell us the journey and at what point you've obviously done your dancing stuff and blah blah blah. What is it you're going forward now? Then how did you start to get into the trauma side and being the coaching side?
Well, the dancing blah blah is actually part of the trauma release. It's actually part of it.
Oh, okay.
Which is okay.
The next stage.
I know. I know, but it just made me smile. And the reason it makes me laugh is because who would have thought that God would have used worship dancing to get me into a business? Only God would use that. It's funny. It is funny. I can laugh at it. But so what happened was I was still working at the bank when my health issues came along. And so it was in 2019, so 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, the Lord had said, I want you to leave the investment business, and I want you to go start a ministry business.
Right.
But what do we always do as silly humans? We decide, I know what that's going to look like. And then we start charging ahead the way we think it should look like, and a lot of doors closed. And so what happened is that I was able to kind of, like I said, the mind, body, spirit, I was able to see all these parts of it where, like really, well, first of all, one of the big things I did is I really dove into the word very heavily. I mean, I really, really wanted to, I studied the Greek, I studied the Hebrew. I went to Bible school. I went to a Bible's foundation school in this time too. So I really knew that whatever I did, I knew that I wanted to help women break free from trauma. I didn't know what it looked like. At first, I was going to be a dance release coach. It was going to be dance only. That's what I decided my business ministry should be. And then the door slammed. I'm like, okay, that's not it. So the Lord, so I went and got a coaching certificate. So I learned I learned the coaching business and what this looks like. But one of the big parts is I had to lay down my identity of trying to not had to spend my time justifying how could you go from banking into doing ministry and justify that you didn't waste all those years of great business development. And you know, the word, it's interesting how the world places value on what we do and what's important and what's not important. And as I started to speak to people, like so the seeds were planted before I knew they were planted. So all those years I was in the infusion center, I was listening to all these modalities, that's the word I was trying to think of a minute ago, all these different modalities of getting help. I was exposed to them. So I became very conversant in them. And so I just started gathering the tools of, from the basic level on the body, keeping your body healthy and the nutritional side of it, but also this whole idea of people living, I call it the bar, right? So I say, are you living above or below the bar? Because when we're living above the bar, just our minds, we are not connecting. We are not connecting with the Lord. And so 95% of all of the healing programs I went to, they were all very new agey. And so, but like everything else, the enemy takes something very good and then he twists it. So I'm like, Lord, what is good? What is good in this and what stays? And so I went around trying everything and just praying into it and saying, Lord, what stays, what goes, and take it through the filter of the word and say, is this something that's in line with the word? And then you've got the other end, you've got the new age end, and then you have the prophetic where it's always just pray and done, one and done, pray and done. And then people saying, what's wrong with me because I'm not getting healed? Everyone's been praying and I'm not getting healed. And 99% of people are between those two.
Just a question with you, obviously, with what you've seen and what we're obviously trying to figure out, and you obviously seen the new agey stuff. Looking in a general bigger picture, do you find that a lot of the, I don't know if you probably see it yourself, but you find a lot of churches there's a lot of new age stuff developing into churches these days? I mean, the subtleness is kind of creeping in a way of the language they use and the way they phrase things. And I suppose in a sense where I say that is because obviously New Age is all about energy and that kind of stuff and your alignments and your kind of that's way they speak. And I've noticed in a way that it seems the wording these days is quite New Agey, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely, the choice of words, you definitely know, and, it just bugs me to no end when people start, call it universe. It's like, no, it's not a universe. It's God. God created the universe.
Yes, that kind of, they just have, it's just like they're following a trend, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but yet at the same time, God did give us these bodies and he did give us the medicines in the earth. You read Genesis, from the beginning, he gave us that right combination, but with the fall, we fell out of it. So our bodies are there designed to be communicating with us, but rather than you being the God, which is what most of those, let's call them pagan, because that's really what they are. It's forms of paganism is what it is. I mean, that's what New Age is, really a form of paganism.
Yeah.
But I went off on a trail for a second. So the enemy says that is all bad stuff. And just like taking good care of our earth, that is something that God asks us to do. But then pagans get attached to it. And then all of a sudden, anything to do with being kind to the earth or being kind to your bodies gets detached. And so the church either says no or they embrace it, totally embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
So discernment. And so, like, for example, is, there's different. So when you get butterflies in your tummy, which everybody does, what is your tummy telling you? What's being communicated?
Kind of nerves. Like I suppose nerves in a sense. Sometimes you get butterflies. You're nervous, aren't you? Your nerves of what's going to
A
happen.
little
You don't think.
fear, a little anxiety, right?
Exactly. The unsure, the unknown kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. So from head to toe, all parts of our bodies have something. That's how they communicate. They let us know you're
Mhm.
you're in pain. My elbow hurts. Oh, there must be something wrong with my elbow.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things I love to do, so the new age ED is just like, I'm going to speak affirmations, or liver, you're great, or whatever they want to do, or they'll put crystals on it or do whatever. But what I teach my clients to do, and I practice every day myself, is, Lord, what am I nervous about? Lord,
Mhm.
what say you? Lord, and because especially with our senses, a lot of times when our eyes are going wacky, the Lord wants us to see something.
Mhm.
So I just say, Lord, what what do you want me to see today? What is it that I'm not seeing? And the hearing and the speaking and that kind of thing is to come into a very personal God and always come to the throne room and to say, Lord, what are you trying to tell me? You know what memos I don't get. My heart is to be with you, Lord, but you know that sometimes I just miss it. Could be totally wrong, but there's a grace in that because he wants our heart. So that's why coming to him every day, which is why I call Awaken Your Heart. That's why I call the method that I teach, is because awaken your heart to receive what the Lord has to say to it. And so what I teach is helping you ask God some questions, but literally it's as complicated as like, God, what am I afraid about? God. And so you're not deciding what your problem is and then telling God to say, solve it my way and get his okay. You go the other way around.
So we're jumping ahead. We're covering we're covering a lot in a small. Let's try and dissect this a little bit. 'Cause this is good. It's good stuff.
I'm just happy to do this in 20 minutes. I mean,
No, no, it's fine. It's good. No, it's all good. There's no rush. It's just a dike. It's important. It's important that you're dissecting this. Is good. So let's bypass the stuff of just the new agey stuff we just talked about. Let's really go into your coaching and what.
It's actually, but it's very, very important to answer your question.
Okay. Yeah.
Is very, very important. Is actually why I went off on the rabbit trail in the first place. Because it's not a total rabbit trail.
Okay.
Because when I was in Chicago getting my treatment,
Right,
new
okay.
agey people would pray over me.
Ah.
And I would see that something was different than when I was at church and people prayed over me. I could distinguish something was different.
That's interesting.
On paper, they were saying the same things, but the spirits they were bringing in were not the same. So
Right.
that is when the Lord opened my eyes for discernment of spirit.
Got you.
And so that's when I was able to then go back to my past as a child and see the spiritual warfare that was at play without having to get into scary demonic language and spirits and all that stuff. And so, so a lot of times I won't give it such spiritual names to it. The spirit of fear, it is what it is, but that can get a little traumatizing. But what happened to me, so I came back so that was in Chicago. I was living in Greenville, South Carolina. And so I went to a girlfriend of mine and I knew that she was very, very, she was a very good Christian that was somebody I could talk to, I could trust and say, I don't know what it is, but these people keep getting attracted to me. What is that all about?
Right.
And that's when I started looking, and that's kind of a little bit, I think, what you were getting to earlier in the conversation is, those spirits attract each other. And so that's where I started to see, like, oh, I can see how these go together. This trauma comes out this way. The enemy comes in and finds a way to capitalize on it. So at that time, I would pray into it every time I'm just getting chills talking about it right now. But I'd ask the Lord, do you want me to go learn about that modality? Do you want me to see what that's about? Because I know that's not of you. And he'd say, but you need to understand what's going on, because when people come your way, you're going to have a perspective and understand where it's coming from. So I can speak very fluent New Age. So I actually can have, because almost everybody I work with, they went that direction because they're mostly my age. You know, they left the church at 20 or 30 and were traumatized in church or their home. And they went that direction and they feel like, I betrayed God. I betrayed him. What am I going to do? And then it's a little bit like drug addicts want to go through rehab with somebody who's done drugs. It's just, you can speak the language.
Yeah.
And most of them are women who work a lot and end up being workaholics, because that's where God did. I can go back and see everything and say, every little trial that I had was preparing me for where I am today.
Yeah.
Because the combination of people that are now coming my way, I can recognize and say, hey, I know what that's about. And I actually walked in your shoes. And it's okay. God is a God of grace. And it's okay. They'll tell me some of their worst experiences and what they did. And I say, I judge not. Judge Judy is not welcome at my table. We don't judge her.
Sorry.
I do, yeah. I bring humor into it. I am over the top crazy and silly with this because it's such a heavy topic. I bring humor into it. I call her Busy Betty. I'm like, okay, Judge Judy and Busy Betty, you were not allowed in this conversation today. You can go sit down. It's not your turn.
The most random celebrities you can bring up. It's just like,
yeah, but the thing about it is, when somebody isn't comfortable talking about their emotions,
yeah,
the way you can talk about, because it's a little bit like why people love testimonies. They'll read a testimony and they'll recognize themselves in it.
mm-hmm.
So when I automatically go straight for, let's start talking about your emotions, they're not ready. That's too scary, and they'll self-sabotage and run for the hills and go back into their coping mechanisms. So that's, I call it a classroom model, where it's like, who shows up for you? And I call her Anxious Annie. Is Anxious Annie showing up right now?
Right.
And let's go to the Lord and ask him, what is Anxious Annie trying to say to me right now? Because once they get comfortable with how they show up, then that's where you start moving in to, how do I let it go?
Mm-hmm.
But first is acknowledging it, because they've never taken a chance, because all this pain that we have inside, it's just stuck in us and it wants to come out. And when we don't let it out, it comes back often as a disease or a health issue. So we're trying to open it up. And so I tried almost every single modality out there. And I now am very comfortable. It doesn't scare me. I'm not overwhelmed when somebody comes in and says what some of the seemingly crazy things that they tried, because all it is they're desperate. They want to be loved, seen, and heard, and understood. And they were told in some capacity they lost their red phone to God because they were naughty girls. Mm-hmm. And my message is like, no, your body's broken down because you believe that's true. But once you believe, so that's why I spend a lot of time. I talk about hearing God's voice, as being confident that you can hear from God. Everybody, even the sinners can hear from God. You don't have to be saved to hear from God. He wants to reach everybody, and he'll meet you where you're at. And it's not like he doesn't know this stuff anyway.
Very true. What was I going to say? Sorry. Listening to
You're laughing at my name still?
No. You've hit a bit of a nerve on me. Anyway, leave that in there. No, it's all good. Let's give us what was I going to ask? Yeah, some of the, obviously you can't, obviously with some of the people you've coached, obviously, do you have examples of stories from the people without naming names and keeping of a genetic. You can talk about of how you've helped them, and I don't know if you can share any of their kind of stuff without keeping it obviously confidential.
I have one. I have a really good one to share with you, and I have permission to share the story, so I don't have to worry about editing it. I have a woman who has overcome overeating,
right?
And that's been her addiction. Food's been her addiction. But a lot of times when you're in your 40s and 50s and dealing with weight, most people have been dealing with weight most of their lives. So one of the things I've helped her work through is to say, your diet, what you put in your body is not going to change this equation, because that's a fruit of what's going on. And just changing your habits, those eating well and changing your habits, that's good and well, but that's not going to solve the problem. Those are Band-Aids. And so let's go inside what's going on in the heart. So what she discovered, and so most people that, when you're dealing with overeating, they usually say that your friend is your food. And that's your healthy companion. Or, when you're feeling lonely, you grab your food. That's a very known thing. And yes, that is 100% true. Most people do that. But going a little deeper is that her body did not want to let go of the weight because, one, it was a protection. It protected her from being abused. But this is the thing that I've been uncovering, not with her, but all my clients that are struggling with weight issues, is that weight is part of their identity. They believe it's part of their identity. The food is not only the faithful friend, but that body weight, that girth, it gives in their mind as a child, that's the hug they never got. That hug around their belly is the hug you didn't get, the healthy love and hug you didn't get. And so we work on receiving hugs from God.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the tools I teach. I call it receiving his wings. And one of the things I do is I have them put their dominant hand, because these are women who have control issues, put their hand on their heart, their dominant hand on their heart, because they're used to controlling. Then they put their left hand over their heart, and that's receiving his wing.
Right.
And then we say, when you are in control, you're not receiving his wing. But we work on resetting their nervous system because they haven't felt safe or supported enough. That's why even being quiet to listen to what the Lord has to say, when they were children, being quiet could have ended up getting you hurt very badly. You had to be on alert 24/7. You were on if you're going for sexual abuse, that's why we all struggled with insomnia, because I was looking over the covers is somebody going to come in my room tonight?
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't feel safe or supported. So my nervous system was on constant high alert, but your body desperately needed to close your eyes and get a hug. And we uncovered that that's part of what their weight has been serving. So as she started to receive the safety of the shelter beneath his wings and lean more into the Lord, that it's just been coming off. And I have several clients that's happening because they were so fixated on the fruit of it, or they're so fixated on the expression. That's what I'm trying to say. The expression is eating a lot. That's not just like being promiscuous isn't about the sexual act.
Mm-hmm.
It's an expression of a heart wound. And not knowing how, all we are designed to want to be seen, heard, and understood. And as children, we come up with these tools that we believe will get us there. But 50% of everything that we do on the subconscious level, we learn by the time we were 5 years old. So when you're 40, 50% of your behavior is determined by the tools that your brain came to the conclusion, because you certainly at 4 years old didn't understand being safe beneath the shelter of his wings. And that's part of where I have to teach women to give themselves grace to say, you're holding your 3 and 4 year old self accountable for a concept that child did not have.
Mm.
You were in self-protection because you had to survive. That's what you had to do as a child, but you don't have to do that anymore. God's here to protect you.
Yeah, I understand that point. Yeah. Because when you're young, the things that happen, it does sometimes sit there, and you can still, even though people ask you, remember this, or they talk about, or they remember more about your childhood than you do, but there's things that you sort of remember but don't remember because it's just a complete blank.
Yeah, it's gone completely blank. And I don't spend a lot of time going back into the old traumas, because what we do is you pray in and say, Lord, which ones what do you want us to go into? And that's another reason why it's very important to do this very prayerfully and just say, Lord, what do you want us to touch on? Because I believe there's all sorts of stuff that's gone on in our lives it's been a God block. We don't need it. We don't need it for what he's called us to do. But the lessons that get through, he promises that he uses everything. He will use everything. And he's using it to shape us for the call that he's put on our lives. And we're going to have to take tools and lessons from each one of those so that that's why we write testimonies, because they land with people. I was calling it the divine pay it forward strategy. I was telling a Christian friend of mine, so they talk about paying it forward. I mean, a testimony is just a pay it forward strategy in some regards, right? Because you're saying, these are my lessons. How can this help you on your path? So you don't have to have as many difficult lessons as I had, and I'm learning from it.
Let's go into your books. Talk about your books a bit more, because you've written a couple. How many books have you written?
Yeah, I've written two books, or 2 published books. I've written about 4 others that haven't been published yet. And I'm also have a publishing company. So
So let's dissect. Let's talk about your books a bit more detail, so for people, and then let's talk about the your, obviously going forward of how this, even anything we've not covered, like say how you can help if people want to reach out to you. I'm talking about, obviously you deal with I'm guessing your clients are mainly in America at the moment, but not like in Scotland or UK. So if there's anybody, let's share about your books, share about how people, if people want to reach out to you, how they can you would help them. Just a brief summary of how you would help them.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, so let's and then just go forward. So let's talk about the books first, and then tell about how you came to write them. A bit insight to the, obviously when you're writing a book, it doesn't just like, oh, just do this. There's a strategy in your head, so kind of thing,
Yep. And so my book, it's the first book that I wrote. I was part of a multi-author book, and it was called Aspire Women Finding Their Purpose. Right. And in it, I think I told you earlier when I was so sick how I wrote the Psalms.
Right.
And so about 75% of that wasn't for public consumption. That was really my journal.
Right. Okay.
But what I did is I pulled out excerpts. I called them vignettes.
Right.
And I put them in that book. So I talked about coming from the abuse. And then I talked about coming into the dance and the coaching. But it was mostly about forgiveness.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't really talked a lot about that, but I really want to emphasize the importance of forgiveness. One of the things I talk about is forgiving my caregivers. My dad, I was by his bedside the entire time that he was dying.
Right.
And a lot of people didn't understand how I could do that. And it was like, because I forgave him. Because you know what? I know how much he was abused as a child. And he was doing what was modeled.
Right.
He didn't get the help he needed to stop it, But so I spend a lot of times talking about forgiveness because that was really the core of my healing was letting go of the bitterness and the anger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I focus a lot on that in that first book. And then in the second one is called Energized by Joy. And these are all on Amazon. Energized by Joy. And it was a multi-author book as well, but it was twice as long. So I went into a little bit more of the detail. And that one, the Aspire book, I focused more on my early origins. My second one, I spent more time as the breakdown of my marriage and also the struggles of parenting teenage little boys when I was going through a health crisis. So I had more emphasis on that in that book. But like I said, it was called Energized by Joy. And that was, people didn't understand why I had so much joy when life on paper looked like it was horrible.
Right, got you.
And so that was the origins of that. And then after that, as being part of these multi-author books, one of the things that's been on my heart is I realized that you can get people to write a lot more when they're not having to write a full book. And a lot of women have testimonies to share, but they're overwhelmed or I can't write a whole book. But the Bible says by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimonies, and women to be able to share your testimony and to be able to be confident sharing it. There wasn't anything like that out there. So and also when I was in those multi-author books, some of my contributors really struggled because the publishers weren't necessarily helping them, coaching them to write something that they'd be proud of down the road to pass on for generations. They needed a writing coach. So that's why I partnered with Judy for my Heart Songs publishing house. And that's heartsongspub.com. And that's where we're starting to put together multi-author books. And so what that is we'll have 20 to 25 women come into our book and share their testimonies. And we're talking about 2,500 words versus 25,000 words in a book, just to give context. And we can coach you. So that book is starting to come together. We also have a single author book that's coming out May 3rd, and it's called Come Dance With Me. The woman's name is Gretchen Schwartzman. I met her through my dancing group, but it's not a dancing testimonial. She's a dancer, but she taught, these are devotions about deeper intimacy with God. And it's a lot like Jesus Calling. It's written more like that, and each of the devotions is written with a scripture attached to it. So we're coming out with that. And then part of what I'm doing as well, and that is that some of the people who come to me who want to write testimonies, they're still in that anger and bitterness phase and they don't know it.
Right.
So that is one of the ways that I'm getting in conversation with them and saying, look, let's work through your trauma together. I can help you work through that so that you can write a story that is a testimony as a victor. Is trauma, your trauma to triumph. We don't want to have the whole thing just spewing out all the badness. We want to talk about how God used each piece of that to bring it into a story of triumph, into stepping into what he called you to be. And so that's what it's Summit to See is the name of my trauma coaching program. And it's Summit and the number 2, C-S-E-E, like to see. So it's like going to the mountain and getting the revelation, summittosee.com. And I do, and most of my coaching sessions are over Zoom. So I meet from people around the globe. So this isn't something I do. I don't just do it locally. So people, I love working with people from around the world.
What's the books? The books that you said you're unpublished, are they your books personally, or are they a joint again? You said you've got, because you said you've obviously got the two books that are published, which is part of a collaboration. But the ones that are technically unpublished, are they sort of just
yes, I have a book. It's called A Walk Through Psalm.
Right.
And then there's a book I'm publishing called Fireside Love Letters with God.
Right.
And that one will be coming out this summer.
Cool.
And that will be under the Heart Songs Publishing brand. And what it is I go through the book of Proverbs for 31 days, the 31 days of Proverbs. And I just each day I read the Bible verse, or I read the chapter, and then I just see how God speaks to me. Or sometimes God will be talking to me about something, and it's my journal. I'll have a conversation with him first, and then I'll read the proverb, and I'll say, I can see how you prepared my heart for this. Or later in that day, I could say, somebody said something that was relevant to what I read. And so I kept a diary of it. Because again, one of the things that's so important to me is for people to know the different ways God speaks to us.
Yeah.
And, I also do something called Daily God Wink. And it's just something kind of fun, because I'm always, every day I talk about how God winked at me that day, and I turned it into a YouTube channel, and I have 2,000 subscribers in 5 weeks. So
that's good.
it's landing, and it's just sharing how God touches me that day in very, very individualized, special ways. And so, that's what I say with my company. I say empowering women to find clarity, purpose, and God's voice.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we decide what's wrong with us, that's us deciding what's wrong with us or what's going on. It's really, God, what do you want me to know? Those are two completely different approaches. God, what do you want me to know to find complete healing and believe what you say, that I'm healed? The blood heals me. What do I need to know to come into alignment with that? That's different, much different than what's wrong with me.
Right. That's interesting. Cool. Cool. So we're going. I'm listening. I'm trying to this. It's a lot to dissect in my head.
I know. We could turn this into a 6-hour episode.
No, it's all good. Yeah, it's like season 15 seasons or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Going forward now, looking at the people you're helping along the way, and the books that you're the books side of things. What's your kind of goal? Okay, we're sort of halfway through this, coming up to almost halfway through this year at the moment. In the next sort of, I don't know, have you got some general goal sets? I don't know if you do goals at all, or kind of ideas that you really like to try and achieve? Obviously, things you want, I don't know, where you see yourself going. Maybe, I know you've obviously you've been in the UK in the past, but maybe with now that you're doing the coaching side and the trauma, do you think maybe there's a door somewhere that you might bring you over here to do speaking, and obviously helping women over here through church connections, and et cetera, et cetera. So what's your kind of general goals going forward, would you say?
Yeah, those are great questions. So my goal right now is, so like I said, we have we're calling for authors now to come in to this book, because if you go to heartsongspub.com, we have an application to join the book. But my big vision, which is kind of what you were just asking me, what's my big vision for this, is I want to train enough people in this approach so that I can have coaches that can take on a lot of the clients so that we can go global. Because what I really love to do is I love to go out there. I like to get on the stages. I like to talk to people about these things, educating them on trauma and the history of it. And so my goal is by the end of next calendar year, so a year and a half from now, I hope to have more coaches on board so that we can reach more people. Because if I spend all my time doing coaching, I can't go out there and tell people about it. So my goal is to be, the international speaker and going out and exposing people to this. And then I want to be able to have coaches where I can say they can come in and they can help you hold your hand going through this. And I want to get it into the churches. I have quite a few churches already that are interested in learning about this, because they realize that just confessing your sins is good. But if you don't believe it, if you do not believe you're forgiven and you haven't forgiven those, your heart becomes very hard. And until you feel safe and supported, it's very hard to do that genuinely. And so churches are seen as very important. We've got a lot of walking wounded Christians. And they don't want the new agey stuff. They're going the new agey way because they said it's got to get something different, but there's got to be something that's Christ-centered. And so that's why this is very 100% Christ-centered.
Yeah, completely agree with that. So I'm trying to. I was saying we could probably do a lot. I was going to ask you. The question that I was going to ask you was just backtrack slightly. How old are your kids now?
My kids are 20 and 22.
22. So, in what part? I'm guessing are they? Well, obviously they're adults now, so they're kind of can pretty much defend for themselves in a sense. Are they still
Yes.
living at home? Are they independent now? Or
No. They're independent.
Completely.
Yeah, no. That's one of the reasons. Like right now, I'm actually traveling across the U.S. because I'm doing something called Trusted House Sitters. And what I do is the Lord has given me a business goal for each that I stay at. My oldest son graduates in December from college. So I will be headed back, living in the South again, starting in December.
All right, cool. So because is that because of the graduation? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the timing's perfect, and the Lord has told me I'm traveling until February 2025, and that's what I'm doing. And this time is just building the infrastructure of what I'm talking about. So the operations will be there and ready to go for people that are willing to take the ball.
I can I can link you up with a lot of people over here as well. I've got some general connections.
And I'm very much. I lived in London for a couple of years. I've been to the British Isles, Edinburgh, love it. Haven't been there for years, but would love to go to Edinburgh again.
Oh, I can connect you up with a couple of churches. There's a new church recently. It's actually set up. It's not an American church, but it's set up. But it's planted by Americans. It's from Atlanta, Georgia. It's called Take Hold. So it's only a new church plant recently. So it started September last year. Did sort of one service a month just to sort of start, and then they went weekly just to the sort of start of February. And they basically just do weekly services now, and it's growing fast, and it's kind of it's really quite cool. It's cool, and it's there's there's a lot of Americans because it's mainly American setup.
Yeah.
But it's not an American church, but it's good. But it's great. It's good to have it. They're always looking for connections, and I think it'd be a good connection for you. I can hook you up.
That'd be great.
That kind of thing, But yeah, it's been a challenge. Anything else? I mean, where can people connect with you if they want to connect with you?
Yes, the best way to connect with me is at my email, and it's Karen at Summit, the number 2, CSEE, like to see.
We can have all that and just the email. Anything else? But you obviously have your websites and your.
And the website is the same, Summit to See. If you're interested in the trauma, the Summit to See. If you're interested in writing books, Heart Songs Pub, like publications, pub.com. And if you just want to get a daily dose of hearing from God, you can go to YouTube at dailygodwinks.com.
Well, we can have these links in the show notes when you're listening on the audio version. We do broadcast via YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, but also there's the audio version as well. Is there anything you think that we haven't really covered, or anything you'd like to just say or mention you think would be important to, obviously, because you target mainly women who have been through trauma. I know men go through trauma as well, but I suppose it's what you're kind of touched on in a sense can be a bit universal. But
absolutely.
But can cover both sides. Was there anything you think that, looking at maybe just through what you've talked about, anything that you think you could share that would be important to somebody listening to this?
Yeah, the biggest thing is the enemy wants you to believe you are your trauma. When you say I am, and then you talked about any of the negative abuse, trauma-related words, that is not your identity. That is something that happened to you. And you are a child of the Almighty God. And while there are lots of tools out there to help us, Jesus is the only tool. The rest of them are just a supplement.
Amen to that. It's good.
Yeah, it's everything I do is very Christ centered. We pray in our sessions, we pray out our sessions, and we're just, and I always pray, it's like, Lord, if there's anything that I say that's not of you, just wipe it from our memory, and only plant the seeds that you want planted. And He's faithful. He's so faithful. He loves that prayer.
Well, we've been going for about an hour and a half.
Wow, I know.
We have certainly covered a lot of bases, and I think it's important. It's an important topic, trauma, and I think it's important to discuss it, and especially just to dissect how you came to being where you are now, to what you've been through. Obviously, your struggle with sex addiction, been raped and all that kind of thing, your own trauma and everything else, and anorexia. It's a big thing these days, and it's especially understanding that a lot of what you've been through, still a lot of the churches don't quite grasp the full factor of it and shy away from it. And I think it's an important topic to talk about. And I think they just don't know how to. I think do you find still that they protect their flock very easily?
People just don't feel safe. They do not feel safe. They don't want to know. They're still trying to pretend they're perfect and all that stuff. Yeah. And the one other thing it's really not appropriate to get into it now because we don't have enough time, but I do want to say, for anybody has spiritual abuse and have questions about that, I am very, very comfortable talking about that topic. Mm-hmm. I did not get into the spiritual abuse because that you have to be careful with your audiences on that one. Yeah. But that is something I have had experience with that. And if there's any listener that has questions, don't stay hostage anymore. I'm very comfortable answering those questions. Cool.
Well, to everyone who has been listening, watching to this podcast, we thank you to Karen Oeser.
Aeser.
I knew I'd get it wrong. Knew it. So Karen Oeser, all the way from originally from having a blank spot. Originally from Oregon. That's it.
Oregon, yes.
I had a brain blank.
Quack. Yes.
I completely lost originally from Oregon. So you're where you are at the moment. Just quickly, you're not in Oregon. You're still in Oregon.
I'm actually in Oregon at the moment.
Right.
Because I came to but I've set South Carolina is really my home.
Right, got you. So you're kind of right, got you. So just want to thank you for my guest. I hope you enjoyed that, and you weren't too having to get a coach to coach you out of all that trauma you've had with my podcast. Sorry, that was.
And I'm going to be praying over you. Yes.
But to everyone who has, on a serious note, everyone who's been listening, watching, wherever you are, thank you for. Hopefully, you will gain something from this, and you can connect with Karen, and hopefully, maybe start your healing journey in regarding your own trauma and etc. in your life. I want to thank you. Thanks again, and thank you it's good to meet you and connect with you on that call, the speed networking, and it was good to kind of chat. And
so glad that we connected,
and we can chat for a bit offline out with as we go finish up. And to say everyone, thank you very much. Have a great day, evening, week, wherever you are in the world.
Everyone.
And we'll speak to you soon on the next one. Take care, and bye for now.